Open book my roommate asked for a simple favor. What HAPPENED next changed everything. I need you to pretend to be my boyfriend for one night, my roommate Mason said, standing in my doorway at midnight with desperation written all over his face. I looked up from my laptop, certain I'd misheard him, but the way his hands were clenched at his sides and the flush creeping up his neck told me he was completely serious. We'd been roommates for 8 months, best friends for 6 of those, and in all that time I'd never seen him look so vulnerable, so completely undone. What? I managed to say, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs for reasons I didn't want to examine too closely. My name is Ryan Carter. I'm 24 years old and I thought I had my life figured out. I'd graduated college 2 years ago with a degree in graphic design, landed a decent job at a mid-sized marketing agency, and found an affordable apartment in the city that didn't require me to have 17 roommates or sell a kidney. Life wasn't perfect, but it was stable, predictable, safe. Then Mason Wright moved in, and everything I thought I knew about myself started to unravel. It happened because my previous roommate, Derek, got engaged and moved in with his fiancée, leaving me scrambling to find someone to split the rent. I'd posted on every roommate finding site I could think of, interviewed half a dozen people who ranged from sketchy to completely incompatible, and was about to give up when Mason responded to my ad. We met at a coffee shop near the apartment, and I knew within 5 minutes that he was different from everyone else I'd talked to. He was tall, maybe 6'2" to my 5'10", with dark hair that fell across his forehead in a way that suggested he'd given up trying to tame it, warm brown eyes that seemed to see right through whatever walls I'd built, and a smile that could light up a room. He was studying architecture at the local university, working part-time at a bookstore to make ends meet, and looking for a place that was close to campus and wouldn't bankrupt him. We clicked immediately, conversation flowing easily from practical matters about rent and cleaning schedules to deeper topics about our dreams, our fears, what we wanted from life. I'm gay, he told me over his second coffee, his tone casual but his eyes watching me carefully for my reaction. I know some people have issues with that, so I'm putting it out there now. If it's a problem, I'd rather know before we waste each other's time. It's not a problem, I assured him quickly, and it wasn't. I'd always considered myself an ally, had several LGBTQ plus friends from college, believed firmly that love was love. What I didn't tell him, what I'd barely admitted to myself, was that I'd been questioning my own sexuality for years, pushing down feelings and attractions that didn't fit the heterosexual narrative I'd built my life around. Mason moved in 2 weeks later, and from day one living with him was easy in a way I'd never experienced with a roommate. He was clean but not obsessive, social but respectful of my need for quiet, and had a sense of humor that perfectly matched mine. We fell into comfortable routines, cooking dinner together most nights, watching terrible reality TV and making fun of it, staying up too late talking about everything and nothing. He'd tell me about his architecture projects, the buildings he dreamed of designing someday, the way he saw beauty in structural elements most people never noticed. I'd show him my design work, and he'd offer insights that were surprisingly helpful, seeing connections between visual art and spatial design that I'd never considered. Within a month, he wasn't just my roommate, he was my best friend. The kind of friend I told things I'd never told anyone else. About my difficult relationship with my father, who'd never understood why I'd chosen arts and crafts over a real career like law or medicine. About my ex-girlfriend Sarah, who'd broken up with me a year ago because she said I was emotionally unavailable, and she needed someone who could fully commit. About my tendency to play it safe, to choose security over passion, to build walls that kept people at a comfortable distance. Mason shared his own stories in return. About coming out to his conservative parents at 18 and being told to leave and never come back. About putting himself through school with scholarships, loans, and whatever work he could find. About his ex-boyfriend Chris, who cheated on him and then tried to blame Mason for not being enough. About his fear that he'd never find someone who could love all of him, the messy, complicated, sometimes difficult parts along with the good. Those late-night conversations, sitting on our worn couch with empty beer bottles between us and the city lights glowing through our windows, became my favorite part of each day. And somewhere along the way, without meaning to, without wanting to, I started developing feelings that went far beyond friendship. It started small, noticing the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, how his hands moved when he was excited about something, the sound of his voice first thing in the morning, rough with sleep. Then it grew into something bigger, more dangerous. My heart would race when he walked into a room. I'd find myself making excuses to be near him, to touch his shoulder when I passed behind him in the kitchen, to sit close on the couch during movie nights. I'd lie awake at night, listening to the sounds of him moving around in the next room, and wonder what it would feel like to be held by him, to wake up next to him, to be his in ways that had nothing to do with a lease agreement. But I pushed it down, buried it deep, because acknowledging those feelings would mean admitting things about myself I wasn't ready to face. It would mean accepting that maybe Sarah had been right about me being emotionally unavailable, not because I couldn't commit, but because I'd been trying to commit to the wrong people. It would mean confronting the possibility that I'd spent my whole life performing heterosexuality without ever questioning whether it was authentic. And most terrifyingly, it would mean risking the best friendship I'd ever had by introducing romantic feelings that Mason almost certainly didn't return. So I kept quiet. I dated occasionally women from dating apps who never made it past a third date because they could sense I wasn't fully present. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects to distract myself from the growing ache in my chest whenever Mason smiled at me. I convinced myself that what I felt was just deep friendship, maybe a little hero worship, nothing more complicated than that. I was fine. Everything was fine. Until that night when Mason appeared in my doorway at midnight and asked me to pretend to be his boyfriend, and everything I'd been carefully suppressing came flooding to the surface. "Let me explain before you say no," Mason said, stepping into my room without waiting for an invitation. He was wearing his favorite worn t-shirt and sweatpants, his hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it, and he looked more stressed than I'd seen him since midterms last semester. "My parents are in town. They called 2 hours ago. Apparently they're staying at a hotel downtown and want to have dinner with me tomorrow night." I sat up straighter, closing my laptop. "Mason, you haven't talked to your parents in 6 years. Why now?" "My grandmother is sick," he said, sinking down onto the edge of my bed with a heavy sigh. "Stage 4 cancer. She doesn't have long, and apparently she's been asking for me. My parents are willing to tolerate me long enough for me to say goodbye to her." The pain in his voice made my chest ache. I'd heard so many stories about his grandmother, the only family member who'd accepted him unconditionally, who'd sent him care packages in college and called him on holidays even when his parents had cut him off. "I'm so sorry," I said, reaching out to touch his shoulder. "What can I do?" "That's the thing," he said, looking at me with those warm brown eyes that seemed even more vulnerable than usual. "I told them I had a boyfriend. I don't know why it just came out. Maybe because I didn't want them to think I've been alone all these years, or maybe I wanted them to see that I'm happy that their rejection didn't destroy me. But now they're expecting to meet him at dinner tomorrow, and I don't actually have anyone." Yeah. My mouth went dry. "So you want me to pretend to be my boyfriend for one evening," he finished. "I know it's a huge ask. I know it's weird and probably uncomfortable for you, but Ryan, I don't have anyone else I can ask. Everyone else I know would either make it obvious they were faking it or would be too nervous to pull it off. But you and I, we already have the foundation. We're comfortable together. People already think we're a couple half the time anyway." That last part made my heart skip. "They do. Come on," he said with a slight smile. "The barista at our coffee place, the guy at the bodega, even my classmates, they all assume we're together. We just have that vibe, I guess." He ran his hand through his hair again. "Look, I know this is asking a lot, and if you're not comfortable with it, I completely understand. I can try to find someone else, or I can just tell my parents the truth. But you're my best friend, Ryan. You're the person I trust most in the world. And if I have to do this incredibly difficult thing tomorrow night, I'd really like to have you there with me." How could I say no to that? Even if my feelings for him complicated everything, even if pretending to be his boyfriend for an evening would be both a dream and a torture, I couldn't let him face his parents alone. Not when he was hurting, not when he needed me. "Okay," I said, my voice coming out rougher than intended. "I'll do it." The relief that washed over his face was immediate and profound. "Really, you're sure?" "I'm sure," I confirmed, trying to ignore the way my pulse was racing. "What do I need to know? How do you want me to act?" "Just be yourself," he said. "We'll just be us, but with some added physical affection. Holding hands, maybe my arm around you, that kind of thing. Nothing too intense. My parents are conservative enough that they'd probably be uncomfortable with any serious PDA anyway." The thought of holding Mason's hand, of being in his arms even in a fake context, made my skin feel too tight. "We should probably practice," I heard myself say. "Make sure it looks natural." He looked surprised, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's actually a good idea. We don't want to look stiff and awkward." He stood and held out his hand. "Come here." I stood, my legs feeling slightly unsteady, and took his hand. His palm was warm, slightly rough from his work at the bookstore, and the simple contact sent electricity racing up my arm. "Like this," he said softly, intertwining our fingers. "Is this okay?" "It's fine," I managed, though my voice sounded strange to my own ears. "What else?" He stepped closer, and suddenly we were standing inches apart, still holding hands, close enough that I could see the darker flecks in his brown eyes, could smell his familiar scent of soap and old books, and something uniquely him. "Maybe something like this," he murmured, releasing my hand to wrap his arm around my waist, pulling me against his side. The contact was overwhelming, his body solid and warm against mine, his arm a comfortable weight around me. I tried to breathe normally, tried to act like this was no big deal, like my entire nervous system wasn't firing all at once. "How does this feel?" he asked, his voice close to my ear. "Natural, very natural," I said, and it was the truth. It felt natural and right, and like something I'd been unconsciously craving for months. "Good," he said, and I thought I heard something different in his voice, but when I glanced up at him, his expression was unreadable. "We'll stick with hand-holding and maybe some casual touches. Keep it simple, and if at any point you're uncomfortable, just give me a signal and we'll dial it back." I'll be fine, I assured him, even as I was already mourning the moment when he'd step away, when this practice session would end and we'd go back to being just roommates, just friends. But he didn't step away immediately. We stood there for a long moment, his arm around me, my heart racing, and I wondered if he could feel it, if he knew what this simple touch was doing to me. Finally, he released me, and the loss of contact felt almost physical. Thank you, Ryan, he said quietly, his eyes holding mine. This means more to me than you know. That's what friends are for, I said, forcing a smile even as the word friends tasted bitter in my mouth. He left then, returning to his own room, and I collapsed back onto my bed, my mind racing. What had I just agreed to? How was I supposed to pretend to be his boyfriend for an entire evening without revealing everything I'd been trying so hard to hide? But I'd committed now, and I wouldn't back out. If Mason needed me to play this role, then I'd be the best fake boyfriend he could ask for, even if it broke my heart in the process. The next day passed in a blur of nervous preparation. Mason was unusually quiet, clearly stressed about seeing his parents, and I spent most of the day trying to distract him while also managing my own anxiety. We'd agreed to meet his parents at an upscale Italian restaurant downtown at 7 p.m., which gave me all day to obsess over what to wear, how to act, whether I could actually pull this off. Wear the blue button-down, Mason suggested when he caught me staring at my closet with despair. The one that brings out your eyes, you look good in that. The casual compliment made my cheeks warm. You think? I know, he said with a slight smile. Trust me. So I wore the blue shirt with dark jeans and my one pair of dress shoes that didn't have scuff marks. Mason wore black slacks and a charcoal gray sweater that fit him perfectly, and when he emerged from his room ready to go, I had to actively stop myself from starring. He looked incredible, professional and put together, but still somehow effortlessly handsome in a way that made my chest tight. Ready? He asked, his voice betraying his nervousness despite his composed appearance. Ready, I confirmed, even though I absolutely wasn't. We took the subway downtown and I noticed Mason's leg bouncing anxiously the entire ride. Without thinking, I reached over and placed my hand on his knee, stilling the movement. He looked at me with surprise, then gratitude, and turned his hand palm up in invitation. I laced my fingers through his, and we sat like that for the rest of the ride, hands clasped, drawing strength from each other. The restaurant was the kind of place with cloth napkins and waiters in suits, where the prices weren't listed on the menu and the wine list was longer than most novels. Mason's parents were already there, seated at a corner table, and I felt him tense the moment he spotted them. You've got this, I murmured, giving his hand a squeeze. I'm right here with you, he nodded, squared his shoulders, and led us to the table, keeping hold of my hand. Mason's parents looked exactly like I'd imagined from his descriptions, his father tall and stern with steel gray hair and cold blue eyes, his mother elegant and composed with Mason's same dark hair and a mouth set in a thin line of disapproval. They both stood as we approached, and the temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Mother, father, Mason said, his voice admirably steady. This is Ryan Carter, my boyfriend. I watched their eyes flick to our joined hands, saw the almost imperceptible flinch from his mother, the tightening of his father's jaw. Mr. and Mrs. Wright, I said, extending my free hand to shake. It's nice to finally meet you. Mason's told me a lot about you. His father's handshake was brief and perfunctory. His mother barely touched my hand before pulling back. Please sit, Mr. Wright said, his tone making it sound more like a command than an invitation. Dinner that followed was one of the most uncomfortable experiences of my life. Mason's parents asked pointed questions clearly designed to find fault. About my job, my family, my intentions toward their son. They managed to make every topic feel like an interrogation, their disapproval radiating across the table like cold fog. Through it all, Mason remained composed, his hand finding mine under the table, his thumb rubbing soothing circles on my palm whenever the questions got particularly harsh. So how did you two meet? Mrs. Wright asked, her tone suggesting she wasn't actually interested in the answer. We're roommates, Mason explained. Ryan needed someone to split rent, I needed a place near campus. We met for coffee and within 5 minutes I knew we'd get along. How convenient, Mr. Wright said dryly. And when did this roommate arrangement become more? I felt Mason tense beside me and jumped in before he had to answer. It happened gradually, I said, looking at Mason with what I hoped looked like genuine affection, which wasn't hard since the affection was real even if the context was fabricated. We started as just roommates, became friends, and somewhere along the way I realized I was falling for him. He's brilliant and kind and one of the best people I've ever known. So I told him how I felt, and luckily for me, he felt the same way. The words came out so easily, so naturally, because they were true. Every word except the part about him feeling the same way. I watched Mason's expression shift, something I couldn't quite read flickering in his eyes before he smiled and squeezed my hand. Ryan has this way of seeing the best in people, he said softly, including me, especially on days when I can't see it myself. How touching, Mrs. Wright said, though her tone suggested she found it anything but. The dinner continued in much the same vein, his parents barely concealing their disdain, Mason and I presenting a united front against their coldness. I found myself getting genuinely angry on his behalf, at how they could look at their accomplished, compassionate, brilliant son and see only disappointment. At how they could sit across from him after 6 years and show no warmth, no regret for the time they'd lost, no love for the person he'd become despite their rejection. By the time dessert came, I was ready to tell them exactly what I thought of their parenting, but then Mrs. Wright brought up Mason's grandmother. "Your grandmother would like to see you before she passes," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "We'll arrange a visit for this weekend if you're available." I felt Mason's hand tighten around mine, saw the flash of pain cross his face. "I'd like that," he said quietly, "thank you." "She was always too soft on you," Mr. Wright said. "Encouraged your lifestyle. I suppose we have her to thank for how you turned out." The casual cruelty of it made my blood boil. "With all due respect, sir," I said, my voice tight with controlled anger, "how Mason turned out is pretty remarkable. He's putting himself through architecture school while working part-time, he's at the top of his class, he's got a full scholarship for graduate school next year, and he's one of the most decent human beings I've ever met. If that's because his grandmother loved and supported him unconditionally, then she did an incredible job." The silence that followed my outburst was deafening. Mason's parents stared at me with matching expressions of shock and offense. Mason's hand in mine was trembling slightly, though I couldn't tell if it was from anger or emotion or both. "I think we're done here," Mr. Wright said coldly, signaling for the check. "We'll be in touch about visiting your grandmother, Mason, assuming your companion can control his outbursts." "Ryan was defending me," Mason said, his voice quiet but firm. "Which is more than I can say you've ever done. Thank you for dinner, we'll see ourselves out." He stood, pulling me up with him, and we left the restaurant together, still holding hands, his parents' disapproving stares burning into our backs. It wasn't until we were outside, the cool evening air hitting our faces, that Mason stopped walking and turned to face me. "I'm sorry," I started to say. "I shouldn't have lost my temper." "Don't apologize," he interrupted. "That was, Ryan, no one's ever defended me like that before. The way you stood up to my father, the things you said." He trailed off, and in the streetlight I could see his eyes were shining with unshed tears. "You meant all of it, didn't you? It wasn't just for show." "Of course I meant it," I said, surprised by the question. "Mason, you're incredible, and the way they treat you, the way they can't see how lucky they are to have you as a son, it makes me furious." He was quiet for a long moment, just looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then he stepped closer, and before I could process what was happening, his arms were around me, pulling me into a tight embrace. I hugged him back immediately, feeling him tremble against me, my hand coming up to cradle the back of his head. "Thank you," he whispered into my shoulder. "For tonight, for everything, for being exactly who you are." We stood like that on the sidewalk, holding each other while the city moved around us, and I wished desperately that this was real, that I had the right to hold him like this whenever I wanted, that the words I'd spoken in the restaurant about falling for him were something I could say in truth rather than as part of a performance. When we finally pulled apart, his eyes met mine, and for just a second I thought I saw something there, something that looked almost like longing. But then he blinked and it was gone, replaced by his familiar warm smile. "Come on," he said, taking my hand again, "let's go home." The days following the dinner with his parents were strange and charged with a tension I couldn't quite name. We'd return to our normal routines, work, school, cooking dinner together, late-night conversations, but something had shifted. Mason seemed more tactile, finding excuses to touch my arm, my shoulder, sitting closer to me on the couch than usual. He'd catch me watching him and hold my gaze a beat too long, his expression unreadable. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was reading too much into innocent gestures because I wanted so badly for them to mean something they didn't. Then 3 days after the dinner, I came home from work to find Mason in the kitchen, cooking what appeared to be an elaborate meal. "What's the occasion?" I asked, dropping my bag by the door and moving to lean against the counter. "No occasion," he said, not looking up from the vegetables he was chopping. "Just felt like cooking something nice." But there was something in his voice, a nervous energy that made me suspicious. "Mason, what's going on?" He set down the knife and turned to face me, and I could see he was struggling with something. "I've been thinking about what you said at dinner, about how you were falling for me." My heart stopped. "That was just part of the act," I said quickly, panic rising in my chest, "to make it believable for your parents." "Was it?" he asked quietly, his brown eyes searching my face. "Because the way you looked at me when you said it, Ryan. I've seen you act before, when you're being polite to people you don't like or pretending to be interested in conversations you find boring. And that wasn't acting, that was real." I couldn't breathe. This was it, the moment I'd been dreading, when my carefully hidden feelings were exposed and our friendship would implode. "Mason," I started, but he cut me off. "Let me finish," he said, stepping closer. "I've been going crazy these past few days, trying to figure out if I imagined it, if I was seeing what I wanted to see. Because here's the thing, Ryan, I have feelings for you too. Real ones, I have for months, maybe longer. But you're straight and you're my roommate and you're my best friend and I couldn't risk losing all of that by telling you. So I buried it, convinced myself it was just proximity and loneliness and the fact that you're one of the only people who's ever really known me. He took another step closer, and now we were standing in our kitchen with barely a foot of space between us, the air thick with tension. But then the other night, pretending to be your boyfriend, holding your hand, having you defend me to my parents like I was someone worth fighting for. Ryan, it felt so right. And I know I asked you to fake it, I know this whole thing was my idea, but I can't stop thinking about it. About you, about us. And I need to know, was any of it real for you? My mind was reeling, trying to process what he was saying, what it meant. You have feelings for me. I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Yes, he said simply. I'm in love with you, Ryan. I think I have been for a while now, and if there's even a chance that you might feel the same way, I do, I interrupted, the words bursting out before I could stop them. God, Mason, I do, I have for months. I thought I was losing my mind, developing these feelings for my male roommate when I'd spent my whole life thinking I was straight. But it's you. You've made me question everything I thought I knew about myself, and it's terrifying and confusing, and I've never been more sure of anything. The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise. Really, really, I confirmed. That night in the restaurant, I meant every word. I am falling for you. Actually, I think I've already fallen. You're brilliant and kind, and when you smile at me, it's like the rest of the world disappears. And pretending to be your boyfriend was the easiest thing I've ever done because it didn't feel like pretending. It felt like finally being honest about what I want. And what do you want? He asked, his voice low and intense, stepping even closer until there was barely any space left between us. You, I breathed. I want you. I want this to be real. Then let it be real, he murmured, and then his hands were cupping my face and he was kissing me and the world tilted on its axis. His lips were soft and warm, the kiss gentle at first, almost questioning like he was giving me a chance to pull away. But I didn't want to pull away, I wanted to sink into him. My hands found his waist, pulling him closer, and the kiss deepened, became something urgent and desperate and absolutely perfect. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against mine and I could feel him smiling. I can't believe this is happening, he said softly. I've imagined this so many times, but the reality is so much better. How long, I asked. How long have you had feelings for me? Remember that night about 4 months ago when we stayed up until 3 a.m. talking about our biggest fears and wildest dreams, he said. I realized that night that I was in love with you. That you knew me better than anyone ever had, and I trusted you in ways I'd never trusted anyone. And when you fell asleep on the couch and I carried you to your bed, you smiled in your sleep and said my name, and I thought my heart was going to explode. I remembered that night, remembered waking up in my bed the next morning with no memory of how I'd gotten there, remembered the warm feeling in my chest that I'd attributed to our deepening friendship. I think I've been falling for you since the day we met, I admitted. I just didn't let myself acknowledge it until recently. Or maybe I couldn't acknowledge it because it would mean accepting that I'm not who I thought I was. And who are you? He asked gently, his thumb stroking my cheek. I don't know yet, I said honestly. I don't know if I'm gay or bi or something else entirely. All I know is that I'm absolutely certain about you, about how you make me feel, about wanting to explore this, whatever it is, wherever it leads. That's enough for me, he said, kissing me again, softer this time, tender and sweet. We'll figure out the rest as we go. The weeks that followed were a blur of discovery and joy and occasional panic as I navigated this new aspect of my identity. Mason was patient with me, never pushing, always giving me space to process my feelings at my own pace. We took things slowly, spending hours just talking about what this meant for us, for our friendship, for our living situation. We decided to keep it quiet at first, not because we were ashamed, but because I needed time to adjust to this shift in my understanding of myself before dealing with other people's reactions and questions. Our physical relationship developed gradually, naturally. Holding hands while watching TV, casual kisses, hello and goodbye, falling asleep together on the couch and waking up tangled together. Every touch still sent electricity through me, every kiss still felt like a revelation. But beyond the physical attraction, what amazed me most was how right it all felt, how being with Mason romantically enhanced rather than diminished our friendship, how the deep emotional connection we'd built became even stronger with this added layer of intimacy. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were moments of doubt and fear, times when I'd spiral into anxiety about what this meant for my future, about how my family and coworkers would react when they found out. Mason would talk me through these moments with patience and understanding, never making me feel guilty for my struggles, always reminding me that my journey was my own and we could take it at whatever pace I needed. The first real test came about 6 weeks into our relationship when Mason's grandmother passed away. He got to visit her a few times before the end, and she'd been thrilled to hear he was in a relationship, though Mason hadn't told her the truth about how it started. The funeral was the following week, and Mason's parents made it clear I wasn't welcome. "It's family only," his mother had said coldly when Mason asked if he could bring me. "Your friend can wait outside if you need emotional support." Mason had been furious, ready to skip the funeral entirely rather than attend without me, but I'd convinced him to go to say goodbye to the one family member who'd always loved him unconditionally. "I'll be fine," I assured him. "This is about her, not your parents. You need to do this." "Come with me anyway," he'd said. "Wait outside if you have to, but I need you there, Ryan. I can't do this without you." So I went, sitting in my car outside the funeral home while the service was held inside, ready to be there the moment Mason needed me. And when he emerged an hour later, his eyes red from crying, his shoulders shaking with suppressed emotion, I was there to pull him into my arms and hold him while he fell apart. We sat in that parking lot for over an hour, him crying against my shoulder, me just holding him and murmuring soothing words, and I realized that this, being there for each other through the hard moments, offering comfort and support without expecting anything in return, this was what love really looked like. "I love you," I told him for the first time that day, the words feeling both terrifying and absolutely right. He pulled back to look at me, his eyes still wet with tears but filled with something that made my chest ache. "I love you too," he said. "God, Ryan, I love you so much." After that day, we stopped hiding. Not dramatically, we didn't make announcements or post couple photos on social media, but we stopped pretending when people asked. I told my coworkers I was seeing someone and casually used male pronouns. Mason introduced me as his boyfriend to his classmates. We held hands in public, kissed goodbye outside the subway, lived our truth without apology or explanation. The reactions were mixed. Most people didn't care or were supportive. A few colleagues seemed surprised but quickly adjusted. My mother was confused but trying to be understanding. "I just never saw this coming, honey, but if he makes you happy." My father didn't take it well initially, living up to his conservative reputation, but slowly came around after meeting Mason and seeing how happy I was. Mason's friends from school were unanimously supportive, having apparently seen this coming long before either of us did. We did lose some people: a cousin who stopped talking to me, a friend from college who said he couldn't support this lifestyle. Each rejection stung, but it also clarified who truly mattered in my life. And with each person who walked away, I found I cared less about their approval and more about living authentically. Because I'd spent 24 years performing a version of myself that I thought the world wanted to see, and I was done pretending. This was who I was, this was who I loved. And anyone who couldn't accept that didn't deserve a place in my life. 6 months into our relationship, Mason received word about his graduate school placement, a full scholarship to a prestigious architecture program, with enough of a stipend that he could finally quit his bookstore job and focus entirely on his studies. We celebrated with champagne and takeout Chinese food, dancing around our living room to terrible pop music, laughing and kissing and making promises about the future we were building together. "Move in with me," I said that night as we lay tangled together in his bed, or was it our bed now? We'd stopped keeping separate rooms 3 months ago, one of us always ending up in the other's bed anyway. "We already live together," he pointed out with amusement. "Officially," I clarified. "Let's get a new place, something that's ours, not just the apartment you moved into as my roommate. A fresh start for both of us." He was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing abstract patterns on my skin. "Are you sure? That's a big step." "I've never been more sure of anything," I said honestly. "I love you, I want to build a life with you, and I know it's fast. I know we've only been together 6 months, but I've known you for over a year now, and you're the best thing that's ever happened to me. So yes, I'm sure." The smile that spread across his face was radiant. "Then yes, let's find our place, let's build our life together." We started apartment hunting the next week, spending weekends touring spaces and imagining our furniture in different layouts, arguing good-naturedly about whether we needed one bathroom or two, whether the kitchen was big enough for both of us to cook comfortably. We finally found a one-bedroom loft in a converted warehouse, exposed brick, huge windows, enough space for Mason's drafting table and my design setup, and a bedroom with morning light that made everything feel hopeful and new. Moving in together officially felt like a milestone, a declaration that this wasn't just a relationship born from convenience or proximity. This was a choice we were making every day to love each other, to build something together, to create a home that was truly ours. The night we finished unpacking, we ordered pizza and sat on the floor surrounded by boxes, and